Hello, my fellow thinkers and dreamers. You are listening to Mind Palace Musings, and I am your host, David Wellman. In the previous episode, we discussed the brain being a receiver of consciousness, and we kind of delved into the more nuanced ideas of that. In today's episode, I'll be exploring the exact opposite. Today's episode is about the brain being a generator of consciousness. Now, just to kind of touch base with some of the concepts I spoke about last episode, consciousness can be defined as awareness or sentience of internal or external existence, and it is something that we as humanity have been pondering and studying for millennia. For as long as we have been conscious, we've wondered, why are we conscious? So yeah, in today's episode, I'll add my own drop to the bucket of the discussion, and I'll let you form your own opinions on the matter. Without further ado, let's get started. So before I get started in the meat of the topic, we're going to have to make a few assumptions. And these assumptions just make it easier for us to go forward with the discussion without having to really qualify what we say, what I say, every time I say it. The first assumption is that our consciousness resides fully within our brains. There is no external component to it, and everything that we are, everything that our conscious being is kept solely within our own heads, within our brain. We must also assume that consciousness is a product of electrical impulses, metabolic processes, and various chemicals, and that all of these various components working in tandem is what produces conscious being, the conscious experience, the experience that lets me convey these words to you right now, and for us to both be present in the moment. When we die, poof, that is all we get, we are gone. Then finally, we must assume that either we are currently living in a real world and that this is not simulated, or if it is simulated, we are native entities of the simulation and not entities on the outside of the simulation, inside the simulation through some apparatus that allows you to experience elements of the simulation. Now, simulation theory is a topic for another episode. I feel like I could make several episodes on it, but yeah, with that all said, we can move forward. As mentioned in my earlier assumptions, consciousness is a product of biological processes, electrical impulses, and chemicals. And this is currently the most accepted model in modern neuroscience. And that makes sense. Treating consciousness as a biological process is very easy for modern science. It's very easy to reason about because we can easily measure and detect brainwaves. We can fully model the brain and run simulations of it, and we can map and chart things. This makes it a very easy model for materialists and reductionists to accept, and for the materialist and reductionist sciences. It's also a very easy and obvious answer for atheists, which when I was younger, was very staunchly an atheist. I couldn't accept any other alternative other than I'm conscious now because of the way my brain is set up and the way all these chemicals and signals in my body interact. And I lived in terror of my eventual death because I didn't want to not exist anymore. Now, my thoughts and opinions have since changed on the matter, which you can hear in the first episode. But getting back to this episode, yes, it makes sense in our modern scientific models where to put forward a theory and a hypothesis, you must also put forward proof. And we've come up with methods and tools that allow us to very easily prove that the consciousness is a biological process, that it is a result of these electrical impulses and chemicals in our brain, which makes sense why it is so widely accepted amongst modern neuroscientists. It's maybe unsurprisingly quite a novel concept that our consciousness is a biological process, and what I mean by that is it's only in recent years that we've been able to detect and map the signals in our brain so accurately. Even as far back as a few hundred years ago, it was still accepted that humans had a soul, and that soul was our consciousness that we were currently experiencing in a material body. But as discussed in the previous episode, just because we don't have the tools and methods required to properly measure and explain a phenomenon doesn't mean that it isn't the case. Just because we didn't have the tools and methods to prove that the consciousness is a biological process doesn't mean that wasn't the case. In the discussion about consciousness and it being a biological process, we of course need to discuss the field of neuroscience. Neuroscience is the study of the nervous system and, most importantly to this conversation, the brain. Just as a brief explanation for those who don't really know what the nervous system is, that is your brain, your spinal cord, and all your nerves. So humans have been pondering and studying consciousness and the brain for thousands of years. It's only in recent years, with the scientific advancements that come with the modern era, that we've had the tools to measure the electrical impulses and signals and more microscopic aspects of the brain. Though this new understanding has not brought us any closer to understanding what consciousness is. It's still an enigma even in the year 2020. The earliest record of the brain, which I know is a weird thing to say, but bear with me. Anyway, in ancient Egypt, as far back as 17 BC, there were papyrus scrolls detailing and describing the brain, which makes sense because back in ancient Egypt, they were mummifying their dead. They had a very good understanding of where the organs in the body were found because they were cutting them up left, right, and center. If someone died, it's like, awesome, time to make a new mummy. Okay, I'm oversimplifying it. The ancient Greeks believed the brain to be the seat of the mind. Now, in ancient Greece, the body was considered sacred, so they weren't doing any autopsies or dissections like the ancient Egyptians were. Hippocrates believed the brain to be the seat of intelligence, while Aristotle believed that the heart was the seat of the intelligence, and that the brain's function was to cool the blood. I shit you not, he believed that men were more rational than beasts because we had larger brains with which to cool our blood. Which, I suppose there's some logic there. If you have a better cooler on your computer, it'll run better. The study of the brain continued with mixed results through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, but one of the most important discoveries from this time was the interaction of electricity and the nerves done by Italian scientist Luigi Galvani, basically by shocking frogs, which some people saw and thought he had found a way to revive the dead, which obviously was not the case. In the modern era, we've made most of our advancements that have led to us understanding very well how the brain works. Now, we're still quite far from understanding how consciousness works, where it's stored, the interactions of our neurochemistry and mental illness, but things such as the microscope have led to the discovery of neurons, for example. Now, I could keep going on and on about the history of neuroscience, but I'm sure that much more smarter, more qualified people than I am have gone into the subject in more detail and probably in a more interesting manner than I have. So, in any case, Now that the stage has been set for the biological consciousness, we can iterate on that, the biological consciousness in a real material world. We have incredibly complex brains that allow us to experience the world in a very unique and wonderful way. Just being conscious means the way that we interact with the world is very different to that of the rest of the animal kingdom. Looking at insects or other less intelligent animals, mammals, arthropods, cephalopods, whatever. Actually, cephalopods, maybe there's an argument for them also being conscious. Same with the more intelligent mammals of the ocean, such as dolphins and whales. Though the verdict's not out on that yet, and for all we know, rocks could be conscious just with no way to show us that they are, and with no instruments to currently measure that. Though we're going to discard that idea because, again, we do not have the tools to even try to prove or disprove such a preposterous idea. Thanks to these complex brains of ours and our nervous system and all of our sensory organs, we're able to feed all this information to our brain, which acts as a very complex biological computer. Stephen Hawking said as much, saying that the afterlife was a child's fantasy and that our brains are just incredibly complex biological chemical computers. The experiences of this material world and our biology interacting with it means that we must cherish these experiences. It means that the matter that we touch and can see and smell and taste and experience is all real. It means that what we're experiencing is not artificial, unless this is a simulation in which we are native entities, and yes, which was discussed in the assumptions in the beginning. Either way, it means this is all real. If we look at it, it also means that inherently there is no meaning to life. You could look at it in a naturalist way to say that the only meaning of life is to procreate and continue life, which does seem to be the case for pretty much all life that does not have the ability to question its own existence. As far as we know, humans are the only species capable of questioning this and potentially assigning life any other meaning than procreation. But with life having no inherent meaning, it means that we are free to give it whatever meaning we want. It's a nihilist's paradise. Maybe an optimistic nihilist, I should say. But it also means that this is all we get. This one little spark of life is what we get, and that we should cherish it. It also means that immortality becomes an inevitability, something that we will never not be working towards. Mankind has been looking for the fountain of youth, the elixir of life, for millennia. We've always wanted to prolong our own life, and in the modern days we kind of have. Humans are reaching record ages, nearing 125. That's insane to think. Hundreds of years ago, you were lucky to live to 40. This also brings some terrifying implications to mental illness. As we age and our brains degrade, as our hardware starts to fail us, we become prisoners of our own mind. Death becomes the only escape, and that escape is the end. It's an inevitability, finality, that's a word. It also brings into question free will. Do we have free will, or are our actions driven by instinct? Because if you look at the actions of any animal, they are typically acting on impulse, on instinct, on signals. The animal is hungry, therefore it will go and find food. The animal is in heat, therefore it will go and procreate. As humans, we can say that we are above that and separate, but are we? Now, this is a topic I find really interesting. So it's one that I'll save for a future episode or series of episodes that I can discuss more deeply, but it is worth considering. And finally, the biological world can bring us some peace. Death is a great equalizer. It removes the divide between rich and poor, privileged and non-privileged, in the sense that one day everyone dies and that's the end of it. We all get the same final rest, unless we reach immortality, which I will discuss later in the episode. Another reason I like the concept of consciousness being a biological construct is that it means true AI is on the horizon. Now, as mentioned in my previous episode, I have a background in computer science and I currently work as a programmer. So AI is a very interesting topic to me. I feel like it's a mirror for us to bounce our own existential dread off of. But if humans aren't biologically separate from the world, if our consciousness truly is a biological product, that means that the day that we can accurately simulate a human brain, or not even a human brain, something more complex in software, that means we've created real consciousness with our own hands. Because why should there be a separation? The only difference is that we are observably and debatably alive, whereas a artificial intelligence would be made out of silicon and, well, electricity, which our consciousness is also made up of electricity. It's in reach, maybe not this year, maybe not in 10 years, maybe not in 50 years, but if we can get our shit together and not destroy the planet, AI it's inevitable. And that's pretty cool. It means that we get to create our own life. If we can create our own life and we can create consciousness, that brings into question our own potential creation, which is kind of ironic. Scientists kind of proving that perhaps we are created by something greater than us, even if that doesn't necessarily mean a God figure and maybe just a more intelligent species than ourselves. And that'll especially become a common theme with AI if they outlast us. They might get to a point where they start questioning their own creation and their own existence, perhaps as the years go on and they just lose the memories of humans creating them. So I think AI is definitely a good endpoint for this whole discussion about biological consciousness, which I think is pretty cool. Another very, very important topic when we are talking about biological consciousness is immortality. If you look at the consciousness as a force of the universe that resides outside of our bodies, as I did in the previous episode, immortality isn't really a question. It's just a thing. It's a constant. It's, yes, there is immortality. But biological consciousness means we are very much not immortal. We do not have much time. In the grand scheme of the cosmos, we're a blip. Now, biological immortality seems like our best bet, which is also being heavily researched at the moment, and obviously people have been searching for it, alchemists and philosophers and scientists alike, for millennia. It's kind of scary. We're moving to maybe not moving there. We live in a dystopian world, I'll say, where the elites are injecting themselves with the blood of the young, and if this is a way to prolong life, they are becoming actual vampires, which reminds me of a kind of topic or theme that Duncan Trussell has. He's a great comedian and arguably my greatest inspiration for starting this podcast, but he talks of vampires not as the scary ancient Nosferatu of the Middle Ages, but more so people that just kind of drain the life and energy out of those around them, and now they're literally draining the life force of the young. This brings to light a terrifying cyberpunk dystopic future where the wealth divide just continues to grow as the rich live forever and the poor are at their mercy. If you've ever seen the show Altered Carbon on Netflix, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In less depressing news, some scientists at least are not doing scary shit like injecting the elite with the blood of the young, but instead using the zebrafish as an analog to study for curing Alzheimer's, because if we do achieve biological immortality, we still have a few hurdles to get over. Mental illness is still something we don't understand very well, and as mentioned earlier, this becomes a terrifying biological prison. Even if we can keep our bodies alive forever, our mind will eventually degrade unless we have some way to cure that. It also means we have to be able to cure all known diseases, including the big one being cancer. If you can cure the aging process, which is currently how biological immortality is being looked at, as aging being this disease that we need to overcome, cancer is still a big issue. As your cells get older and older, the instructions get more garbled and messed up, and that's what leads to cancer, where you've got these cells that have lost the signal to die, which is kind of ironic. I've realized now that I have said it, and maybe something worth discussing in a future episode. Now, we also need a way to regrow limbs and scar tissue, because otherwise, again, we'd be these immortal minds in dilapidated prisons where if you lose a limb, that's kind of it. Now, this goes into cyberpunk territory where we start getting cool bionic limbs, and eventually we'd all be like RoboCop, where we are more machine than man. Continuing on that train of thought, we can also look at technological immortality, which is probably also possible. If you can find a way to place the brain into an artificial body without killing the person in the process, all you have to do is keep the brain tissue, healthy and fresh and alive. And then as long as you protect that brain, the artificial body can go on forever. Now, who knows what kind of implications this could have? This might be very stressful for our brains, which we understand so much and yet so little about, where it might be stressed out to be in this environment, which may lead to absolute anguish in our consciousness. A fantasy I had when I was younger was digital immortality, which has been explored in a few pieces of popular culture, like the movie Transcendence, for example, where we would achieve immortality by uploading our consciousness into the cloud, into a machine. Now, as I get older, I realize how unlikely this is, because even nowadays in modern computing, there's no way to move a running program from one location to another. You're more so copying the data of the program over, and even so, you can't really do it while it's running. Now, if we look at the consciousness as a program in a biological computer, which it kind of is with the way the electricity and chemicals are all interacting, we probably wouldn't be able to move our consciousness into a digital format without killing ourselves. And then if you did get the person into the cloud, it brings the question, is this really the person we uploaded? Maybe, maybe not. The consciousness being a biological construct brings several implications with it. It means that we were nothing before our birth, and when we die, we will return to being nothing. It means that this is all we get and that we should live to the fullest. It's a miracle that we get to experience consciousness at all, because so much had to come together just for us to be able to experience these brief moments we get in the grand scheme of the cosmos. It means that life has no meaning or reason, and that it is up to us how we want to live it. The universe doesn't care what we do, because it doesn't care about us. We are just some highly evolved apes on a tiny rock in the arm of the Milky Way galaxy. It means that Death is the end and life is precious. We should preserve it where we can. Death is also a great equalizer, and regardless of how we chose to live our lives, it's an inevitability for all of us. It also means that our pain, our suffering, our anguish, and our regrets do not follow us. When we die, we finally get a moment of peace. I hope this brief look at the consciousness being a biological construct has satiated the curious minds of the materialist, and that the previous episode could intrigue the minds of the spiritualist. In the next episode, which may or may not be the last episode of this series, I will explore another angle in which the brain is a construct of consciousness, as is everything else, which I will save for the next episode. But in any case, my fellow thinkers and dreamers, my seekers of truth and knowledge, this has been Mind Palace Musings. I have been your host, David Wellman, and I thank you for listening.